Welcome to today's horror ghost stories. Itsy Bitsy. Mother, may you read me a bedtime story or sing me to sleep? Little 6 years old, Maggie Pearson asked her mother, Erica. Of course, darling. Anything you want, but after, you need to go to sleep. You have your first day of school tomorrow morning. You don't want to be tired now. Oh, I won't, Mother. I promise I will go to sleep right after. Erica smiled at her daughter. There was a downfall of rain that summer night, and little Maggie could not sleep. The sounds of thunder and the flashes of lightning bolts made her pull up the covers over her head. She kept pulling the covers down below her eyes to look around her dark bedroom. The window in front of her became saturated in pouring rain, and the tall tree that stood beside scratched its curly branches against the glass. Maggie wanted her mommy, but was too afraid to wake her up, thinking she would be angry if she were not asleep yet. Maybe she could wake up Daddy so she could crawl in his side of the bed to sleep with him. Maggie was too scared to leave her bed, though. As Maggie tried to fall asleep, she heard a strange noise coming from under her bed. She was in a moment of silence and penetrating shock. The sound from under the bed became louder and clearer to her ears. It sounded almost like a schoolgirl teasing and snickering to herself from throwing little bits of paper and eraser shavings at her crushing class unexpectedly. Then the snickering from under the bed became to be the silent whispers of mumbles. Maggie did not know what to do. The neighborhood kids told stories about the boogeyman and how he lives under the beds of children during the night and will snack on them when they are unaware of the situation. Right now, Maggie was aware. The rain continued throughout the night and into the early morning. Maggie's father, Lance Pearson, was up at 4:30 in the morning to get ready for work. Maggie was still awake, and she could hear her father's footsteps in the upstairs hallway going downstairs to prepare himself a cup of coffee. It has been nearly 8 hours in bed, and Maggie could not sleep. She could not even close her eyes. The sound from underneath was keeping her awake like a stimulant. She wanted to sleep, but was always denied. A couple more hours later, and her mum will have to wake her up for school. Maggie is going to have a rude awakening if she sleeps. If it will let her sleep. An hour went by and Maggie could hear her father's truck pulling out of the driveway to leave for work. The rain was beginning to stop and only sprinkles and slight wind remained. The mumbles below started to fade away like the storm. Maggie could now get the much-needed rest she deserved. She closed her eyes and fell asleep. Rah! Erica heard a loud scream from downstairs. She quickly rushed upstairs to check on Maggie. It was 6:30 and Erica wondered what could have made a noise such as what she heard. When she opened Maggie's bedroom door, snores of slumber were introduced to her from her daughter. She was asleep, and a noise like what Erica heard would have waked up Maggie. Erica walked over to her daughter's bed and gave her a kiss on the forehead. "Love you, Maggie," she whispered. It was 7:45, which was the time Maggie needed to wake up to get ready for school. Erica stopped making breakfast and marched up the stairs to wake up Maggie. She wondered what the scream was an hour ago from now. Was she just hearing things, or was it in fact real? Erica tried to not think about it. It's the itsy bitsy spider. There it is, it's here for us. Come and see. Erica could hear Maggie in her room and wondered what she was talking about so quietly. As Erica opened her daughter's bedroom door, she could hear Maggie singing to herself. "It's the itsy bitsy, oh yes, the itsy bitsy spider who climbed up to the window. He came down and I watched his webbing unfold. Here he is, so be happy. He arrived, he only comes once. So say hi before he says goodbye. Oh, it's the itsy bitsy spider, and I'm glad he's alive. Maggie, good morning. What are you doing up already? Are you excited for your first day? Erica saw her daughter was up out of bed and staring out the window, singing to herself. Maggie, are you all right? Maggie was not responding. She had her face away from her mother from across the bedroom. She just kept looking out the window and singing the song her mother never heard or taught her. Maggie, answer me. You're making me scared. Erica began to walk up to the back of her daughter, and as soon as she became close, Maggie stopped singing and a drop of liquid landed on Erica's forehead. She touched her forehead and smeared the liquid against her fingers. It was saliva. Erica looked up, and on the ceiling was something she would have never imagined, not even in her wildest dreams. It was a man. Well, what resembled a man's appearance to Erica, but unusual. It was some sort of humanoid who had all pale skin, not a single hair on its body, eyes that were pitch black without the lids to protect them, no genitals, no legs, a neck that arched its head only face forward, little holes for ears and a nose, 3 arms on each side of its body, a pair connected to the hips, another on the side of the ribs, and the last on the shoulders. It was a creature, a human spider. Ah! Stay away from my daughter! Take me instead! Erica begged the creature as it leapt off the ceiling and onto the floor, showing its brown as wood razor teeth. It enlarged the opening of its mouth. Salvia seeped out like a dog with rabies, foaming at the mouth. The skull formation began to push out and indent its head as it looked at Erica and started to move forward to her, widening its jaw, leaving a trail of dripping saliva on the floor. Please, no, stop it. Do not come near my daughter. Take me. Not her. Erica quickened her movement to Maggie to guard her from the savaged, starved creature. Erica closed her eyes as she held on tightly to Maggie's gown. She could feel the creature's warm breath against her face and the excessive spits of saliva wetting her body. Erica opened her eyes. It was like staring into an opaque mirror or into space. She could only see blackness in the eyes of the creature. It fazed her to stay still and continue to stare into them. The creature's skull moved inside its head like a repetitive twitch of motion. Its neck began to extend closer to Erica's face as its head stayed in the same straightforward position. Erica's nose pressed against the creature's miniature holes of a nose. She closed her eyes once again, and for the first time of her life, they remained closed. Maggie proceeded to look out the window as she could hear her mother being ate alive by the creature. She sang the Itsy Bitsy song once again with tears rolling down her cheeks. The creature was behind her, biting away at Erica's neck, pulling away from it to swallow the blood and flesh, and repeating the process to the rest of the body. Maggie watched as the yellow school bus drove down the street to go to school for the first day. It was her first day and Erica's last. The house was silent and no signs of anyone was close. "Honey, I'm home." Lance walked in the house, welcoming himself to his wife as normal. He received no answer back from his wife. "Maggie, Erica, is anyone home?" It was too quiet for the Pearson homestead. As frequently, Erica would be preparing dinner and Maggie would be watching television or playing in the living room. Lance took off his shoes and walked through the house, making his way up the stairs. "Maggie, are you home? How was your first day at school, sweetie?" There was no response. Lance marched his way to Maggie's bedroom. He knocked on the door with a clam motion on his hand. A few seconds went by and no reply. What was going on? Was anybody home? He opened the door and Maggie was not in her room. His wife and his daughter could not be found. Lance never felt any more alone. As a child, he witnessed his father in the middle of the night walk into his bedroom he shared with his sister At the time, they were both 8 and helplessly watched, in shock, their own father who crawled into his sister's bed to violate her. His sister Pamela was a heavy sleeper and was not awakened by the molestation. Lance was, though, and startled. He laid in bed as he watched his father commit the act. His father looked up at him and quietly said, "Be quiet, you don't want to wake her up now." Lance nodded his head and wrongly agreed. In the end, their father climaxed onto Pamela's underwear, and when laundry day came, their religious mother blamed Pamela for performing self-masturbation and slapped her across the mouth with a leather belt. Lance was too afraid to speak up and tell his mother what he saw. He just stood by the doorway and watched as Pamela received her fallacious punishment. His father walked over to him during the happening and ran his fingers through Lance's hair as he smiled down at him.
Lance walked downstairs calling out his family's names. "Maggie! Erica! Where are you two?" Again, no answer. Where could they be? A thump was made from upstairs. "Maggie, is that you?" Lance ran to the stairs. "Maggie, are you there?"
A moment of silence swept through the air. Then he heard her.
"Daddy, are you home?" Lance could hear Maggie's voice from upstairs in her bedroom. "Sweetie, why didn't you answer me? You nearly scared me to death. Is Mommy with you?" Again, another moment of pure silence. "Maggie?" All of a sudden, Lance
felt the stairway shake, then a crashing stomp landed on the stair steps going down to Lance in front of his toes. He could feel a presence in front of him. Coming from down the steps in a rapid, forceful launch was Erica's dead body. Her body slammed against the wall as she made her way to Lance's legs, tumbling him down to the ground. Lance opened his eyes and saw his wife's lifeless, gnawed-off face pushed against his. The face was a red muscle and bloody tendons, ripping off her facial bones. He screamed with all the oxygen inside his lungs and kept screaming a constant rhythm. It sometimes hesitated and came back up, breathing heavily, which made his wife's body thrust up from his. Behind Erica's torn, blood-red hair, Lance witnessed his daughter. Maggie was on the ceiling, moving in an akin seizure animation. Her legs arose behind her head as she started to run down the ceiling to the wall of the stairway. Maggie's heart pumped viciously and continually, appearing to attempt to push its way out of her chest. She jumped off from the wall and landed on a stair step. She had a mouthful of blood pouring out, and her crawling appearance vaguely described it to Lance as a monster. Maggie's hands and her head were twisted the other way around, along with her feet that were a bit crooked, and her spinal cord stuck out of her skin, leaving it for Maggie to bite on as she made her way forward to her father. Lance took Erica's body and threw it off him to be encountered by the vision of his daughter's head, to twist around back in place, and for her to leap out at him, screaming in a tone that sounded like burbling phlegm of an upcoming vomit of excessive bulks of black bile and blood. Maggie feasted on her father, Lance, as he tried to scream for help. He couldn't. It was transferred to cries of pain the second Maggie bit into Lance's jugular, and from then on, life in the Pearson household became absolutely silenced for good. On the ceiling, a short distance away from the feeding, was the human spider-like creature. It watched Maggie as she fed on her father and licked up the blood from the open wound and the surrounding area. It made it hungry, and Maggie was the only food in sight. The creature began to crawl its way from the ceiling to Maggie. Once you close your eyes, you think there is a safe place ahead, but in reality, you are being watched from above like a bird soaring down on you, flying by your heads. There will always be someone there, and you will be dependent on them when you don't even know you will be.
Keep thinking what you are doing right now is in private. It isn't.
There are eyes everywhere looking at you. The one above could be watching you, or it could be that red man down below.
Or it could just be me.
You never know.
Infamous McMason.
Next story. The Russian sleep experiment. Russian researchers in the late 1940s kept 5 people awake for 15 days using an experimental gas-based stimulant. They were kept in a sealed environment to carefully monitor their oxygen intake so the gas didn't kill them, since it was toxic in high concentrations. This was before closed-circuit cameras, so they had only microphones and 5-inch thick glass porthole-sized windows into the chamber to monitor them. The chamber was stocked with books and cots to sleep on, but no bedding, as well as running water, a toilet, and enough dried food to last all 5 for over a month. The test subjects were political prisoners deemed enemies of the state during World War II. Everything was fine for the first 5 days. The subjects hardly complained, having been promised falsely that they would be freed if they submitted to the test and did not sleep for 30 days. Their conversations and activities were monitored, and it was noted that they continued to talk about increasingly traumatic incidents in their past. The general tone of their conversations took on a darker aspect after the 4-day mark. After 5 days, they started to complain about the circumstances and events that lead them to where they were and started to demonstrate severe paranoia. They stopped talking to each other and began alternately whispering into the microphones and one-way mirrored portholes. Oddly, they all seemed to think they could win the trust of the experimenters by turning over their comrades, the other subjects in captivity with them. At first, the researchers suspected this was an effect of the gas itself. After 9 days, the first of them started screaming. He ran the length of the chamber repeatedly, yelling at the top of his lungs for 3 hours straight, at which point he continued attempting to scream, but was only able to produce occasional squeaks. The researchers postulated that he had physically torn his vocal cords. The most surprising thing about this behavior was how the other captives reacted to it, or rather didn't react to it. They continued whispering into the microphones until the second of the captives started to scream. The 2 non-screaming captives took the books apart, smeared page after page with their own feces, and pasted them calmly over the glass portholes. The screaming promptly stopped. So did the whispering into the microphones. After 3 more days passed, the researchers checked the microphones hourly to make sure they were working, since they thought it impossible that no sound could be occurring with 5 people inside. The oxygen consumption in the chamber indicated that all 5 must still be alive. In fact, it was the amount of oxygen 5 people would consume at a very heavy level of strenuous exercise. On the morning of the 14th day, the researchers did something they said they would not do to get a reaction from the captives. They used the intercom inside the chamber, hoping to provoke any response from the people they were afraid were either dead or vegetables. They announced, "We are opening the chamber to test the microphones. Step away from the door and lie flat on the floor, or you will be shot. Compliance will earn one of you your immediate freedom." To their surprise, they heard a calm voice respond in a single phrase, "We no longer want to be freed." Debate broke out among the researchers and the military forces funding the research. Unable to provoke any more response using the intercom, it was finally decided to open the chamber at midnight on the 15th day. The chamber was flushed of the stimulant gas and filled with fresh air, and immediately voices from the microphones began to object. 3 different voices began begging, as if pleading for the life of loved ones, to turn the gas back on. The chamber was opened, and soldiers were sent in to retrieve the test subjects. They began to scream louder than ever, and so did the soldiers when they saw what was inside. 4 of the 5 subjects were still alive, although no one could rightly call the state that any of them in life. The food rations past day 5 had not been so much as touched. There were chunks of meat from the dead test subject's thighs and chest stuffed into the drain in the center of the chamber, blocking it and allowing 4 inches of water to accumulate on the floor. Precisely how much of the water on the floor was actually blood was never determined, All 4 surviving test subjects also had large portions of muscle and skin torn away from their bodies. The destruction of flesh and exposed bone on their fingertips indicated that the wounds were inflicted by hand, not with teeth, as the researchers initially thought. Closer examination of the position and angles of the wounds indicated that most, if not all of them, were self-inflicted. The abdominal organs below the rib cage of all 4 test subjects had been removed. While the heart, lungs and diaphragm remained in place, the skin and most of the muscles attached to the ribs had been ripped off, exposing the lungs through the rib cage. All the blood vessels and organs remained intact, but had been taken out and laid on the floor, fanning out around the eviscerated but still living bodies of the subjects. The digestive tract of all 4 could be seen to be working, digesting food. It quickly became apparent that what they were digesting was their own flesh that they had ripped off and eaten over the course of days. Most of the soldiers were Russian special operatives at the facility, but still, many refused to return to the chamber to remove the test subjects. The subjects themselves continued to scream to be left in the chamber and begged and demanded that the gas be turned back on, lest they fall asleep. To everyone's surprise, the test subjects put up a fierce fight in the process of being removed from the chamber. One of the Russian soldiers died from having his throat ripped out, and another was gravely injured by having his testicles ripped off and an artery in his leg severed by one of the subject's teeth. Another 5 of the soldiers lost their lives, if you count the ones that committed suicide in the weeks following the incident. In the struggle, one of the 4 living subjects had his spleen ruptured and bled out almost immediately. The medical researchers attempted to sedate him, but this proved impossible. He was injected with more than 10 times the human dose of a morphine derivative and still fought like a cornered animal, breaking the ribs and arm of one doctor. His heart was seen to beat for a full 2 minutes after he had bled out, to the point there was more air in his vascular system than blood. Even after it stopped, he continued to scream and flail for another 3 minutes, struggling to attack anyone in reach, and just repeating the word "more" over and over, weaker and weaker, until he finally fell silent. The surviving 3 test subjects were heavily restrained and moved to a medical facility. The 2 with intact vocal cords continuously begging for the gas, demanding to be kept awake. The most injured of the 3 was taken to the only surgical operating room that the facility had. In the process of preparing the subject to have his organs placed back within his body, it was found that he was effectively immune to the sedative they had given him to prepare him for the surgery. He fought furiously against his restraints when the anesthetic gas was brought out to put him under. He managed to tear most of the way through a 4-inch wide leather strap on one wrist, even through the weight of a 200-pound soldier holding that wrist. It took only a little more anesthetic than normal to put him under, and the instant his eyelids fluttered and closed, his heart stopped. In the autopsy of the test subject that died on the operating table, it was found that his blood had tripled the normal level of oxygen. The muscles that were still attached to his skeleton were badly torn, and he had broken 9 bones in his struggle to not be subdued. Most of them were from the force his own muscles had exerted on them. The second survivor had been the first of the group of 5 to start screaming. His vocal cords destroyed, he was unable to beg or object to surgery, and he only reacted by shaking his head violently in disapproval when the anesthetic gas was brought near him. He shook his head yes when someone suggested reluctantly that they should try the surgery without anesthetic, and did not react for the entire 6-hour procedure of replacing his abdominal organs and attempting to cover them with what remained of his skin. The surgeon presiding stated repeatedly that it should not be medically possible for the patient to still be alive. One terrified nurse assisting the surgery stated that she had seen the patient's mouth curl into a smile several times whenever his eyes met hers. When the surgery ended, the subject looked at the surgeon and began to wheeze loudly, attempting to talk while struggling. Assuming this must be something of drastic importance, the surgeon had a pen and pad fetched so the patient could write his message. It was simple: keep cutting. The other 2 test subjects were given the same surgery, both without anesthetic as well, although they had to be injected with a paralytic for the duration of the operation. The surgeon found it impossible to perform the operation while the patients laughed continuously. Once paralyzed, the subjects could only follow the attending researchers with their eyes. The paralytic cleared their system in an abnormally short period of time, and they were soon trying to escape their bonds. The moment they could speak, they were again asking for the stimulant gas. The researchers tried asking why they had injured themselves, why they had ripped out their own guts, and why they wanted to be given the gas again. Only one response was given: "I must remain awake." All 3 subjects' restraints were reinforced and they were placed back into the chamber, awaiting determination as to what should be done with them. The researchers, facing the wrath of their military benefactors for having failed the stated goals of their project, considered euthanizing the surviving subjects. The commanding officer, an ex-KGB, instead saw potential and wanted to see what would happen if they were put back on the gas. The researchers strongly objected but were overruled. In preparation for being sealed in the chamber again, the subjects were connected to an EEG monitor and had their restraints padded for long-term confinement. To everyone's surprise, all 3 stopped struggling the moment it was let slip that they were going back on the gas. It was obvious that at this point, all 3 were putting up a great struggle to stay awake. One of the subjects that could speak was humming loudly and continuously. The mute subject was straining his legs against the leather bonds with all his might, first left, then right, then left again, for something to focus on. The remaining subject was holding his head off his pillow and blinking rapidly. Having been the first to be wired to the EEG machine, most of the researchers were monitoring his brain waves in surprise. They were normal most of the time, but sometimes flatlined inexplicably. It looked as if he were repeatedly suffering brain death before returning to normal. As they focused on paper scrolling out of the brainwave monitor, only one nurse saw the man's eyes slip shut at the same moment his head hit the pillow. His brain waves immediately changed to that of deep sleep, then flatlined for the last time as his heart simultaneously stopped. The only remaining subject that could speak started screaming to be sealed in now. His brain waves showed the same flat lines as the one who had just died from falling asleep. The commander gave the order to seal the chamber with both subjects inside, as well as 3 researchers. One of the named 3 immediately drew his gun and shot the commander point blank between the eyes, then turned the gun on the mute subject and blew his brains out as well. He pointed his gun at the remaining subject, still restrained to a bed, as the remaining members of the medical and research team fled the room.
"I won't be locked in here with these things. Not with you," he screamed at the man strapped to the table.
"What are you?" he demanded.
"I must know."
The subject smiled. "Have you forgotten so easily?" The subject asked. "We are you. We are the madness that lurks within you all, begging to be free at every moment in your deepest animal mind. We are what you hide from in your beds every night. We are what you sedate into silence and paralysis when you go to the nocturnal haven where we cannot tread." The researcher paused, then aimed at the subject's heart and fired. The EEG flatlined as the subject weakly choked out, "So, nearly free." Next story, No End House. Let me start by saying that Peter Terry was addicted to heroin. We were friends in college and continued to be after I graduated. Notice that I said I. He dropped out after 2 years of barely cutting it. After I moved out of the dorms and into a small apartment, I didn't see Peter as much. We would talk online every now and then. AEM was king in pre-Facebook years. There was a period where he wasn't online for about 5 weeks straight. I wasn't worried. He was a pretty notorious flake and drug addict, so I assumed he just stopped caring. Then one night I saw him log on. Before I could initiate a conversation, he sent me a message. "David, man, we need to talk." That was when he told me about the No End House. It got that name because no one had ever reached the final exit. The
rules were pretty simple and cliché. Reach the final room of the building and you win $500.
There were 9 rooms in all. The house was located outside the city, roughly 4 miles from my house. Apparently, Peter had tried and failed. He was a heroin and who knows what the fuck addict, so I figured the drugs got the best of him, and he wigged out at a paper ghost or something. He told me it would be too much for anyone, that it was unnatural. I didn't believe him. I told him I would check it out the next night, and no matter how hard he tried to convince me otherwise, $500 sounded too good to be true. I had to go. I set out the following night. When I arrived, I immediately noticed something strange about the building. Have you ever seen or read something that shouldn't be scary, but for some reason, a chill crawls up your spine? I walked toward the building, and the feeling of uneasiness only intensified as I opened the front door. My heart slowed, and I let a relieved sigh leave me as I entered. The room looked like a normal hotel lobby decorated for Halloween. A sign was posted in place of a worker. It read, "Room 1 this way, 8 more follow, reach the end and you win." I chuckled and made my way to the first door. The first area was almost laughable. The decor resembled the Halloween aisle of a Kmart, complete with sheet ghosts and animatronic zombies that gave a static growl when you passed by. At the far end was an exit. It was the only door besides the one I entered through. I brushed through the fake spider webs and headed for the second room. I was greeted by fog as I opened the door to room 2. The room definitely upped the ante in terms of technology. Not only was there a fog machine, but a bat hung from the ceiling and flew in a circle. Scary. They seemed to have a Halloween soundtrack that one would find in a 99-cent store on loop somewhere in the room. I didn't see a stereo, but I guessed they must have used a PA system. I stepped over a few toy rats that wheeled around and walked with a puffed chest across to the next area. I reached for the doorknob and my heart sank to my knees. I did not want to open that door. A feeling of dread hit me so hard I could barely even think. Logic overtook me after a few terrified moments, and I shook it off and entered the next room. Room 3 is when things began to change. On the surface, it looked like a normal room. There was a chair in the middle of the wood-paneled floor. A single lamp in the corner did a poor job of lighting the area, casting a few shadows across the floor and walls. That was the problem. Shadows, plural. With the exception of the chairs, there were others. I had barely walked in the door and I was already terrified. It was at that moment that I knew something wasn't right. I didn't even think as I automatically tried to open the door I came through. It was locked from the other side. That set me off. Was someone locking the doors as I progressed? There was no way. I would have heard them. Was it a mechanical lock that set automatically? Maybe. But I was too scared to really think. I turned back to the room, and the shadows were gone. The chair's shadow remained, but the others were gone. I slowly began to walk. I used to hallucinate when I was a kid, so I wrote off the shadows as a figment of my imagination. I began to feel better as I made it to the halfway point of the room. I looked down as I took my steps, and that's when I saw it, or didn't see it. My shadow wasn't there. I didn't have time to scream. I ran as fast as I could to the other door and flung myself without thinking into the room beyond. The fourth room was possibly the most disturbing. As I closed the door, all light seemed to be sucked out and put back into the previous room. I stood there, surrounded by darkness, not able to move. I'm not afraid of the dark and never have been. but I was absolutely terrified. All sight had left me. I held my hand in front of my face, and if I didn't know what I was doing, I would never have been able to tell. Darkness doesn't describe it. I couldn't hear anything. It was dead silence. When you're in a soundproof room, you can still hear yourself breathing. You can hear yourself being alive. I couldn't. I began to stumble forward after a few moments, my rapidly beating heart the only thing I could feel. There was no door in sight. I wasn't even sure there was one this time. The silence was then broken by a low hum. I felt something behind me. I spun around wildly but could barely even see my nose. I knew it was there though. Regardless of how dark it was, I knew something was there. The hum grew louder, closer. It seemed to surround me, but I knew whatever was causing the noise was in front of me, inching closer. I took a step back. I had never felt that kind of fear. I can't really describe true fear. I wasn't even scared I was going to die. I was scared of what the alternative was. I was afraid of what this thing had in store for me. Then the lights flashed for a second, and I saw it.
Nothing. I saw nothing, and I know I saw nothing there. The room was again plunged into darkness, and the hum became a wild screech. I screamed in protest. I couldn't hear this goddamn sound for another minute. I ran backwards, away from the noise, and fumbled for the door handle.
I turned and fell into room 5. Before I describe room 5, you have to understand something. I am not a drug addict. I have had no history of drug abuse or any sort of psychosis, short of the childhood hallucinations I mentioned earlier, and those were only when I was really tired or just waking up. I entered the no-end house with a clear head. After falling in from the previous room, my view of room 5 was from my back, looking up at the ceiling. What I saw didn't scare me, it simply surprised me. Trees had grown into the room and towered above my head. The ceilings in this room were taller than the others, which made me think I was in the center of the house. I got up off the floor, dusted myself off, and took a look around. It was definitely the biggest room of them all. I couldn't even see. The door from where I was, various brush and trees must have blocked my line of sight with the exit. Up to this point, I figured the rooms were going to get scarier, but this was a paradise compared to the last room. I also assumed whatever was in room 4 stayed back there. I was incredibly wrong. As I made my way deeper into the room, I began to hear what one would hear if they were in the forest. Chirping bugs and the occasional flap of birds seemed to be my only company. That was the thing that bothered me the most. I heard the bugs and other animals, but I didn't see any of them. I began to wonder how big this house was. From the outside, when I first walked up to it, it looked like a regular house. It was definitely
on the bigger side, but there was almost an entire forest in here.
The canopy covered my view of the ceiling, but I assumed it was still there, however high it was. I couldn't see any walls either. The only way I knew I was still inside was that the floor matched the other rooms, with standard dark wood paneling. I kept walking, hoping that the next tree I passed would reveal the door. After a few moments of walking, I felt a mosquito fly onto my arm. I shook it off and kept going. A second later, I felt about 10 more land all over my skin. I felt them crawl up and down my arms and legs, and a few made their way across my face. I flailed wildly to get them all off, but they just kept crawling. I looked down and let out a muffled scream, more of a whimper, to be honest. I didn't see a single bug, not one bug was on me, but I could feel them crawl. I heard them fly by, my face and sting my skin, but I couldn't see a single one. I dropped to the ground and began to roll wildly. I was desperate. I hated bugs, especially ones I couldn't see or touch. But these bugs could touch me, and they were everywhere. I began to crawl. I had no idea where I was going, the entrance. was nowhere in sight and I still hadn't even seen the exit. So I just crawled, my skin wriggling with the presence of those phantom bugs. After what seemed like hours, I found the door. I grabbed the nearest tree and propped myself up, mindlessly slapping my arms and legs to no avail. I tried to run, but I couldn't. My body was exhausted from crawling and dealing with whatever it was that was on me. I took a few shaky steps to the door, grabbing each tree on the way for support. It was only a few feet away when I heard it, the low hum from before. It was coming from the next room and it was deeper.
I could almost feel it inside my body, like when you stand next to an amp at a concert.
The feeling of the bugs on me lessened as the hum grew louder. As I placed my hand on the doorknob, the bugs were completely gone, but I couldn't bring myself to turn the knob.
I knew that if I let go, the bugs would return, and there was no way I would make it back to room 4.
I just stood there, my head pressed against the door, marked 6, and my hand shakily grasping the knob. The hum was so loud I couldn't even hear myself pretend to think. There was nothing I could do but move on.
Room 6 was next, and room 6 was hell. I closed the door behind me, my eyes held shut, and my ears ringing.
The hum was surrounding me. As the door clicked into place, the hum was gone. I opened my eyes in surprise, and the door I had shut was gone. It was just a wall now. I looked around in shock. The room was identical to room 3, the same chair and lamp, but with the correct amount of shadows this time. The only real difference was that there was no exit door, and the one I came in through was gone. As I said before, I had no previous issues in terms of mental instability, but at that moment, I fell into what I now know was insanity.
I didn't scream.
I didn't make a sound. At first, I scratched softly. The wall was tough, but I knew the door was there somewhere.
I just knew it was.
I scratched at where the doorknob was.
I clawed at the wall frantically with both hands, my nails being filed down to the skin against the wood.
I fell silently to my knees, the only sound in the room the incessant scratching against the wall.
I knew it was there.
The door was there, I knew it was just there.
I knew if I could just get past this wall. Are you all right?
I jumped off the ground and spun in one motion.
I leaned against the wall behind me, and I saw what it was that spoke to me.
To this day, I regret ever turning around. There was a little girl. She was wearing a soft white dress that went down to her ankles. She had long blonde hair to the middle of her back and white skin and blue eyes. She was the most frightening thing I had ever seen, and I know that nothing in my life will ever be as unnerving as what I saw in her. While looking at her, I saw something else. Where she stood, I saw what looked like a man's body, only larger than normal and covered in hair. He was naked from head to toe, but his head was not human and his toes were hooves. It wasn't the devil, but at that moment it might as well have been. The form had the head of a ram and the snout of a wolf. It was horrifying, and it was synonymous with the little girl in front of me. They were the same form.
I can't really describe it, but I saw them at the same time.
They shared the same spot in that room, but it was like looking at two separate dimensions. When I saw the girl, I saw the form, and when I saw the form, I saw the girl. I couldn't speak.
I could barely even see.
My mind was revolting against what it was attempting to process. I had been scared before in my life, and I had never been more scared than when I was trapped in the 4th room. But that was before room 6. I just stood there staring at whatever it was that spoke to me. There was no exit.
I was trapped here with it.
And then it spoke again. "David, you should have listened." When it spoke, I heard the words of the little girl, but the other form spoke through my mind in a voice I won't attempt to describe. There was no other sound. The voice just kept repeating that sentence over and over in my mind, and I agreed.
I didn't know what to do. I was slipping into madness, yet couldn't take my eyes off what was in front of me. I dropped to the floor. I thought I had passed out, but the room wouldn't let me. I just wanted it to end. I was on my side, my eyes wide open, and the form staring down at me. Scurrying across the floor in front of me was one of the battery-powered rats from the 2nd room. The house was toying with me.
For some reason, seeing that rat pulled my mind back from whatever depths it was headed. I looked around the room.
I was getting out of there.
I was determined to escape the house and live and never think about this place again. I knew this room was hell, and I wasn't ready to take up a residency. At first, it was just my eyes that moved. I searched the walls for any kind of opening. The room wasn't that big, so it didn't take long to soak up the entire layout. The demon still taunted me, the voice growing louder as the form stayed rooted where it stood. I placed my hand on the floor, lifted myself up to all four, and turned to scan the wall behind me. Then I saw something I couldn't believe. The form was now right at my back, whispering into my mind about how I shouldn't have come. I felt its breath on the back of my neck, but I refused to turn around. A large rectangle was scratched into the wood, with a small dent chipped away in the center of it. Right in front of my eyes, I saw the large 7 I had mindlessly etched into the wall. I knew what it was. Room 7 was just beyond that wall where room 5 was moments ago. I don't know how I had done it. Maybe it was just my state of mind at the time. But I had created the door.
I knew I had.
In my madness, I had scratched into the wall what I needed the most, an exit to the next room. Room 7 was close. I knew the demon was right behind me, but for some reason, it couldn't touch me. I closed my eyes and placed both hands on the large 7 in front of me.
I pushed as hard as I could.
The demon was now screaming in my ear. It told me I was never leaving. It told me that this was the end, but I wasn't going to die. I was going to live there in room 6 with it.
I wasn't. I pushed and screamed at the top of my lungs. I knew I was going to push through the wall eventually. I clenched my eyes shut and screamed, and the demon was gone.
I was left in silence. I turned around slowly and was greeted by the room as it was when I entered. Just a chair and a lamp.
I couldn't believe it, but I didn't have time to waste. I turned back to the 7 and jumped back slightly.
What I saw was a door. It wasn't the one I had scratched in, but a regular door with a large 7 on it. My whole body was shaking. It took me a while to turn the knob. I just stood there for a while, staring at the door.
I couldn't stay in room 6. I couldn't. But if this was only room 6, I couldn't imagine the 7 had in store.
I must have stood there for an hour, just staring at the 7. Finally, with a deep breath, I twisted the knob and opened the door to room 7. I stumbled through the door, mentally exhausted and physically weak. The door behind me closed and I realized where I was.
I was outside.
Not outside like room 5, but actually outside. My eyes stung.
I wanted to cry. I fell to my knees and tried, but I couldn't. I was finally out of that hell. I didn't even care about the prize that was promised. I turned and saw that the door I just went through was the entrance.
I walked to my car and drove home, thinking of how nice a shower sounded. As I pulled up to my house, I felt uneasy. The joy of leaving No End House had faded, and dread was slowly building in my stomach. I shook it off as residual from the house and made my way to the front door. I entered and immediately went up to my room. There on my bed was my cat Baskerville. He was the first living thing I had seen all night, and I reached to pet him. He hissed and swiped at my hand. I recoiled in shock, as he had never acted like that. I thought, whatever, he's an old cat. I jumped in the shower and got ready for what I was expecting to be a sleepless night. After my shower, I went to the kitchen to make something to eat. I descended the stairs and turned into the family room. What I saw would be forever burned into my mind, however. My parents were lying on the ground, naked and covered in blood. They had been mutilated to near unidentifiable states. Their limbs had been removed and placed next to their bodies, and their heads sat on their chests, facing me. The most unsettling part was their expressions. They were smiling as though they were happy to see me. I vomited and sobbed there in the family room.
I didn't know what had happened. They didn't even live with me at the time. I was a mess.
Then I saw it, a door that was never there before. A door with a large 8 scrawled on it in blood. I was still in the house.
I was standing in my family room, but I was in room 7.
The faces of my parents smiled wider as I realized this. They weren't my parents. They couldn't be, but they looked exactly like them. The door marked 8 was across the room, behind the mutilated bodies in front of me.
I knew I had to move on, but at that moment I gave up.
The smiling faces tore into my mind. They grounded me where I stood.
I vomited again and nearly collapsed.
Then the hum returned. It was louder than ever, and it filled the house and shook the walls. The hum compelled me forwards. I began to move slowly, making my way closer to the door and the bodies. I could barely stand, let alone walk. And the closer I got to my parents, the closer I came to suicide. The walls were now shaking so hard, it seemed as though they were going to crumble. But still, the faces smiled at me.
As I inched closer, their eyes followed me.
I was now between the two bodies, a few feet away from the door. The dismembered hands clawed their way across the carpet towards me, all while the faces continued to stare.
New terror washed over me and I walked faster. I didn't want to hear them speak. I didn't want the voices to match those of my parents.
They began to open their mouths, and the hands were inches from my feet.
In a dash of desperation, I lunged toward the door, threw it open and slammed it behind me.
Room 8, I was done. After what I had just experienced, I knew there wasn't anything else this fucking house could throw at me that I couldn't live through. There was nothing short of the fires of hell that I wasn't ready for. Unfortunately, I underestimated the abilities of No End House. Unfortunately,
things got more disturbing, more terrifying.
And more unspeakable in Room 8. I still have trouble believing what I saw in Room 8. Again, the room was a carbon copy of Rooms 3 and 6, but sitting in the usually empty chair was a man. After a few seconds of disbelief, my mind finally accepted the fact that the man sitting in the chair was me. Not someone who looked like me. It was David Williams. I walked closer. I had to get a better look, even though I was sure of it. He looked up at me and I noticed tears in his eyes. Please.
Please don't do it. Please don't hurt me. What? I asked her. Who are you? I'm not going to hurt you. Yes, you are. He was sobbing now.
You're going to hurt me, and I don't want you to. He sat in the chair with his legs up and began rocking back and forth. It was actually pretty pathetic looking, especially since he was me, identical in every way. Listen, who are you?
I was now only a few feet from my doppelganger.
It was the weirdest experience yet, standing there talking to myself.
I wasn't scared, but I would be soon.
Why are you... You're going to hurt me. You're going to hurt me. If you want to leave, you're going to hurt me. Why are you saying this? Just calm down, all right?
Let's try and figure this. And then I saw him.
The David sitting down was wearing the same clothes as me, except for a small red patch on his shirt embroidered with the number 9. You're going to hurt me.
You're going to hurt me. Don't, please. You're going to hurt me. My eyes didn't leave that small number on his chest. I knew exactly what it was.
The first few doors were plain and simple, but after a while they got a little more ambiguous. 7 was scratched into the wall, but by my own hands.
8 was marked in blood above the bodies of my parents.
But 9, this number was on a person, a living person. Worse still, it was on a person that looked exactly like me. David?
I had to ask, yes. You're going to hurt me. You're going to hurt me. He continued to sob and rock. He answered to David. He was me, right down to the voice.
But that 9, I paced around for a few minutes while he sobbed in his chair. The room had no door and, similarly to Room 6, the door I came through was gone. For some reason, I assumed that scratching would get me nowhere this time. I studied the walls and floor around the chair, sticking my head underneath and seeing if anything was below.
Unfortunately, there was.
Below the chair was a knife. Attached was a tag that read, "To David, from management." The feeling in my stomach as I read that tag was something sinister.
I felt like throwing up.
The last thing I wanted to do was remove that knife from under that chair. The other David was still sobbing uncontrollably. My mind was spinning into an attic of unanswerable questions.
Who put this here and how did they get my name?
Not to mention the fact that as I knelt on the cold wood floor, I also sat in that chair, sobbing in protest of being hurt by myself. It was all too much to process. The house and the management had been playing with me this whole time. My thoughts, for some reason, turned to Peter, and whether or not he got this far. If he did, if he met a Peter Terry sobbing in this very chair, rocking back and forth.
I shook those thoughts out of my head.
They didn't matter. I took the knife from under the chair, and immediately the other David went quiet. "David," he said in my voice, "what do you think you're going to do?"
I lifted myself from the ground and clenched the knife in my hand. "I'm going to get out of here." David was still sitting in the chair, though he was very calm now.
He looked up at me with a slight grin.
I couldn't tell if he was going to laugh or strangle me.
Slowly, he got up from the chair and stood, facing me.
It was uncanny.
His height and even the way he stood matched mine. I felt the rubber hilt of the knife in my hand and gripped it tighter.
I don't know what I was planning on doing with it, but I had a feeling I was going to need it. Now, his voice was slightly deeper than my own. "I'm going to hurt you. I'm going to hurt you, and I'm going to keep you here." I didn't respond. I just lunged and tackled him to the ground.
I mounted him and looked down, knife poised and ready. He looked up at me terrified. It was like I was looking in a mirror. Then the hum returned, low and distant, though I still felt it deep in my body. David looked up at me as I looked down at myself. The hum was getting louder, and I felt something inside me snap. With one motion, I slammed the knife into the patch on his chest and ripped down. Blackness fell on the room, and I was falling. The darkness around me was like nothing I had experienced up to that point.
Room 4 was dark, but it didn't come close to what was completely engulfing me. I wasn't even sure if I was falling after a while.
I felt weightless, covered in dark. Then a deep sadness came over me. I felt lost, depressed, and suicidal. The sight of my parents entered my mind. I knew it wasn't real, but I had seen it, and the mind has trouble differentiating between what is real and what isn't. The sadness only deepened. I was in room 9 for what seemed like days, the final room.
And that's exactly what it was, the end.
No End House had an end, and I had reached it.
At that moment, I gave up. I knew I would be in that in-between state forever, accompanied by nothing but darkness.
Not even the hum was there to keep me sane. I had lost all senses.
I couldn't feel myself. I couldn't hear anything.
Sight was completely useless here. I searched for a taste in my mouth and found nothing. I felt disembodied and completely lost.
I knew where I was.
This was hell. Room 9 was hell. Then it happened. A light.
One of those stereotypical lights at the end of the tunnel. I felt ground come up from below me, and I was standing.
After a moment or two of gathering my thoughts and senses, I slowly walked toward that light. As I approached the light, it took form. It was a vertical slit down the side of an unmarked door. I slowly walked through the door and found myself back where I started, the lobby of No End House. It was exactly how I left it.